Welcome to chapter 14. In chapters 12 and 13, we looked at statistics that measure how the economy is doing. We looked at the unemployment rate, the rate of inflation. We looked at whether the economy is in a recession. We looked at the poverty statistics and real GDP to measure whether the economy is growing or not. Okay? Well, when the economy is not operating as we want it to, what can be done to fix the economy? Well, that's what chapter 14 and 15 are going to be about. In chapter 14, we're going to look at a group called the Federal Reserve System, or the Fed, and what they can do. Okay? But before we get into the Fed, it's important that you understand how banks work. Banks are businesses like any other, okay? And all businesses sell something. Hamburger stands sell hamburgers, and car dealerships sell cars, and barbershops sell haircuts. What is it that banks sell? Well, banks sell money. If I needed to buy a hamburger, I'd go to In-N-Out. But if I need to buy some money to buy a car, or to buy a house, or to pay for a college education, I would go to the bank and I would get a loan. When you get a loan, you're buying money from the bank. Okay? Whether you're borrowing $10,000 or $20,000 to buy a car, or several $100,000 to buy a house, you're going to get a loan from the bank. And the bank is going to charge you a price for that money. And that's the interest rate that you have to pay to get it. For example, if I were to get a car loan today, I might get a loan of 3%. That means I'm going to pay 3% a year on that borrowed money in order to have it, in order to get it. But where does the bank get the money that they loan out? A car dealership buys the car from the manufacturer. Okay? West Covina Toyota buys their Toyotas from Toyota, then they mark them up and they sell them to us for a higher price. Well, where does the bank get the money? They get the money from us in the form of deposits. When we deposit our money at the bank for safekeeping, they pay us for that money. They pay us an interest rate. Unfortunately, today's interest rates are really, really low. In fact, the lowest they've ever been. If you put your money in at Chase or Wells Fargo or Bank of America, some of the biggest banks in our area, they're only paying 0.01%. That's almost basically giving the money to them for free. Okay? But they do pay a little bit of interest. Now, some banks pay more than that. I happen to have a bank that pays 0.6%, which is still terrible, but it's 60 times better than Bank of America or Wells Fargo or Chase, where you might have your money. Okay? So how does the bank make money? People like you and me deposit our money at the bank, and they pay us for that. So they're paying out, say, 0.01% or even 0.6%. But then they take the money that we give them and they loan it out to someone else who wants to buy a car or a house or go to college. Okay? So they're making money on the difference between the two. Okay? Even if they're paying out more to get it, they're still making a profit. Okay? And banks are typically a very profitable business. In fact, it's very difficult for a bank to go bankrupt unless people don't pay back on their loans. Of course, during the Great Depression, you remember from your history classes that a lot of banks did go bankrupt because a lot of people were defaulting on their loans. That means they weren't paying back on their loans. Okay? Imagine you have, it's the Great Depression, and you went out to the bank, you borrowed money to buy a house, but then you lost your job and you could no longer pay the loan back. Well, now the bank is in big trouble. They've taken somebody else's deposits, loaned them to you, figuring you were going to pay them back, but you didn't. Okay? This caused a lot of banks to go bankrupt. And as some banks started to go bankrupt, people began to get very nervous about their bank. Maybe their bank hadn't gone bankrupt yet, but they were worried that it might. Look, my neighbor over here, his bank went bankrupt and he lost his life savings. What happens if that happens to my bank? So people began to panic, and they began to run to the banks and ask for their money. This is called a run on the banks, or a bank run. And people said, give me my money. I want my money now before the bank goes bankrupt. Well, the banks don't have the money. They've loaned it out. They've got some of it, but they don't have the majority of it because they've loaned it out. So even good banks were starting to go bankrupt because people were running to them and saying, give me my cash, give me my cash. And so the government said, we got to stop this. So in 1933, the federal government declared a bank holiday where they just simply closed all the banks. And during that time, it was just a couple of days, they created something called the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And the FDIC insures your bank deposits in the event that the bank goes bankrupt. So if you have your money in the banks, it's FDIC insured, meaning that if that bank goes bankrupt, you don't have to worry. The federal government is guaranteeing that you'll get your money back through the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. In the beginning, way back in 1933, the FDIC limit was $2,500. So if you had $2,500 or less, you didn't have to worry about it if the bank went bankrupt. And you might think, well, $2,500, that's not very much. But in 1933 it was. $2,500 in 1933 would buy a house. Okay, so this was a good sum of money. So you didn't have to worry. If the bank went bankrupt, you were still good. Your life savings and all your savings were still secure, all the way up to $2,500. Now, if you had more than that, they would only guarantee up to $2,500. Well, of course, since the Great Depression, 1933, people have gotten a lot more money. So they've changed this limit. Okay? The book says it's up to $100,000. Well, the book is old and out of date. Okay? Now it is $250,000. $250,000. So if you have up to $250,000 in the bank and the bank goes bankrupt, no worries. The FDIC guarantees that you're going to get your money back. Okay? This limit of $250,000 is per depositor and per bank. What does that mean? Well, what if you had more than $250,000? Could you get more insurance for that money? Yes, if you have a joint account, like Mrs. Ward and I have an account for two of us. We share that account. Well, we each get $250,000. It's per depositor. So we actually have $500,000 worth of, we don't have $250,000, but we do have $500,000 worth of insurance. So in the event that the bank goes bankrupt, we don't have to worry. Okay? Plus it's per bank. So let's say you had $1 million. I'm answering one of the homework questions. If you had $1 million, you'd want to separate it out to different banks. You'd put some of it, $250,000, say at Bank of America, $250,000 at Chase, $250,000 at Wells Fargo, $250,000 at Citibank. And then even if all four of those banks went bankrupt, you would be still secure because you get $250,000 per depositor and per bank. So even if all four banks went bankrupt, you'd still be okay. The FDIC still exists today to calm people down and not worry. So even if the bank goes bankrupt, you don't have to worry. You're still going to have all your money. Okay? This was established in 1933, and it still exists today. Okay? All right. When you put your money in the bank, you deposit your money, the bank is going to loan it out. But can they loan out all of the money? On page 396 in the book, they talk about the fractional reserve system. Okay? The fractional reserve system says no. Banks cannot loan out all of your money. By law, they're required to keep a certain amount in reserve. That's what they mean by the fractional reserve. A certain percentage or fraction the banks have to hold on to. They can loan out your money, but not all of it. Okay? The reserve requirement is the percentage that the banks are required to hold on to. And the book uses 20%. it's not always 20%. It depends on whether it's a checking account or a savings account or whether it's a CD account. Okay? The reserve requirement does vary, but the reserve requirement is the percentage that the banks are required to hold on to. Okay? So they can't loan out all of it. But let's say you make a deposit. Okay, let's say Bill. Bill makes a $100 deposit. What's going to happen to that $100? Well, the banks want to loan it out. That's how they make money. Okay? But they can't loan out all of it. They're required to keep a certain percentage in reserve. In this case, 20%. So 20% is required to be taken out by the bank. So they have to hold on to that. They have to put it in their vault. They have to keep track of $20, but they can now loan out the other $80. And that's what banks do. They take some out and hold on to it because they're required by law to do that, but then they loan out the rest to somebody who wants to buy a house or buy a car, buy a boat, whatever it might be. Okay? Well, let's say that Sally goes to the bank and she gets a loan for $80. Okay? When she gets that loan, it's going to come in the form of a check, and she's going to deposit that check into her bank. Okay? As soon as Sally deposits that $80 check that she borrowed, the bank now has to keep out 20%. They have to take out in reserve and hold on to 20%. 20% of 80 is $16. Now there's $64 that can be loaned out. Okay. Let's say that Mike wants to borrow that $64. So he goes to the bank and he borrows $64. And I know people aren't borrowing just $80 or $64, but we're using these numbers. Okay? So Mike goes to the bank and he borrows $64. They're going to give him a check. He's going to deposit that check into his bank. And again, as soon as he deposits that money, the bank has to take out 20% in reserve. They can then loan out the rest, which is $51.20. And this could keep going, right? Every time a deposit is made, the bank takes out a little bit, and then they loan the rest. Takes them out, loan the rest. Takes them out, loan the rest. Okay. But once the money is put into the bank initially, it's said to expand. That's what they say there on page 396. The deposits expand. Okay. How much does Bill get to spend? Well, he put $100 in the bank. So he gets to spend $100. That's what's in there. He could take that money out and spend it. Sally gets to spend $80, and Mike gets to spend $64. Together, they get to spend, if you added all these up, $244. The money supply is said to expand all the way out to $244. Even though only $100 was deposited. And you might be thinking, how does this happen? Is this like magic that when the money is put into the bank, it just expands or it creates more? Well, that's because most of you think money looks like paper money that you have in your wallet. And that's true, money does look like that, but the vast majority of money in the United States does not look like paper money. It looks like numbers in a computer system. Those of you that have a job, you've gotten a paycheck. Okay? They didn't give you a bunch of paper money. They gave you a piece of paper with some numbers on it. You took it to your bank and your bank said, wow, this is great. And they gave you more numbers in your account. Your account balance grew. Okay, you got $100 more or whatever. Your balance grew. They didn't give you extra dollar bills. They don't have a place in the vault for your money where it's just stacked up. Here's a bunch of money for Bill or Sally or Mike or you, okay? It's simply numbers in a computer system. In fact, when this $80 loan went out, they didn't give Sally $80 bills or four $20 bills. They gave her a check, and they just simply moved numbers into her account. And so the money supply is said to expand. There's a formula there in your book that shows how the money supply, how much the money supply will grow to. And it's in your notes as well. And it goes something like this. The money supply is equal to the deposits divided by the reserve requirement. So how much did Bill originally deposit? I know they use a different term in the book. They use member bank reserves, but that just means the deposits. How much did Bill deposit? He deposited 100. The reserve requirement was 20%. And you write 20%, of course, as a decimal, 0.20. $100 divided by 0.20 is $500. So even though only $100 was originally deposited, because the bank starts loaning that money out, it's going to expand or grow all the way out to $500. And as we're going to learn in the next section, how much money exists in our economy is very important. So when money is put into the banks, it expands. That's why it's very important that banks stay open. So during the Great Depression, when people were running to the banks and taking their money out, that was catastrophic. That's why the FDIC was created, to stop people from doing that, from telling them stop panicking and yanking all your money out. Okay? So when the money is put in, when it's deposited, okay, it begins to expand and grow. And that's a very important idea. All right, so that covers chapter 4, section 14, section 2, where we learn about banks. Okay? And now we need to learn about what's called the central bank. The central bank. When you and I need to borrow money, where do we go? Well, we go to the bank. But where does the bank go to borrow money? Where would a bank borrow money? Well, they go, if you go back to page 394, they go to the nation's central bank. A central bank is a bank for the banks. So when you and I need to borrow money, we go to a regular bank, but the banks go to our country's central bank. And every industrialized nation has a central bank for their country and their economy. Okay? Our central bank, the Central Bank of the United States, is called the Federal Reserve System. The Federal Reserve System was established in 1913. The banking industry in the United States was a mess, and so the government had to step in and try to fix it. And there's a whole history of things, but I'm not going to get into that. Okay? The Federal Reserve System was established in 1913 to serve as our country's national bank. Okay? We often just call it the Fed. The Fed, short for the Federal Reserve System. The Fed serves as our nation's central bank. Okay? But it's not just one bank. It makes it seem like it's one bank, but it's actually a system of banks. If you'll turn to page 400 in your book, there's a diagram that shows the structure of the Fed. How is the Fed organized? Okay. Well, down at the bottom, we have what we call member banks. In order to be part of the Federal Reserve System, you have to join it. You have to become a member. Just like you become a member of Costco or a member of your gym. You have to become a member bank by paying money to join the Federal Reserve System. Okay? These member banks, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase, Citizens Bank, Citibank, Ally Bank, Barclays Bank, any of the banks that you can think of in the United States have chosen to become members of the Federal Reserve System. There's some advantages, as we're going to look at here in just a minute. There's some advantages to being part of the Federal Reserve System, so that if these member banks need to borrow money, they can go to the Federal Reserve System and borrow that money. Okay? These member banks are the ones that actually own the system. And this is important. The Fed, or the Federal Reserve System, was established by the government, but it is not owned by the government. It tells you there on page 400 that the Federal Reserve System is privately owned. It's actually owned by these member banks. These member banks own the Federal Reserve. Okay? It works kind of like a country club, and I know most of you might not know how a country club works, okay? But when you join a country club, like South Hills Country Club or Villa Verde Country Club or Glendora Country Club, what you're doing is actually buying ownership in the country club. Okay? Down the street from my house, not too far, is the Glendora Country Club. Okay? It's got a golf course, it's got a pool, it's got tennis courts, all that kind of stuff. If I were to join the country club, I would pay money. It's expensive. Let's say $10,000. Okay? I pay $10,000 to join the Glendora Country Club. I'm now a member of the country club, and I'm a part owner of it. Let's say that there are 99 other people that own the country club, that are members of the country club. Each one of us now owns 1/100th of the country club. So let's say that the country club says, well, no one's golfing here anymore. Let's just sell off all this country club property. And they sold it for $100 million. And they would sell it for more than that. But let's say they sold it for $100 million. Since I'm one of the 100 members, I'd get $1 million back as my investment, because I own the country club. Okay? Every time a member joins the country club, they own a portion of it. Just like these member banks now own the Federal Reserve System. Okay? The individual member banks are then organized into districts. The Federal Reserve System is divided into 12 districts. Each district has its own district bank. And there are 12 of them. So the member banks are organized into districts. We here in California are in the 12th district. Okay? We are far and away the largest district. The 12th district has Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Arizona, part of Utah, part of Idaho, Alaska, Hawaii. Okay? We're far and away the biggest district. Other districts are big, but not nearly as big as ours. Okay? Each district has its own district bank. Our district bank is located in San Francisco. So there are 12 Federal Reserve District banks. There's the Federal Reserve District Bank in San Francisco. There's one in St. Louis. There's one in Kansas City. There's one in Chicago. There's one in Minneapolis. One in Dallas. There's one in Atlanta, Richmond, Virginia. There's one in in New York and Boston and Philadelphia. Okay? I don't know if I got to 12, but there are 12 district banks spread throughout the United States. So if a bank here in California has an issue, it's going to go to the Federal Reserve District Bank in San Francisco to get a loan or to help process their checks and things like that. Okay? The member banks are organized into districts. The district banks report to what we call the Board of Governors. The Board of Governors is made up of 7 individuals that oversee and supervise the Federal Reserve System. Much like we have a school board to oversee the school district, or a corporation has a board of directors, okay? The Board of Governors oversees the Federal Reserve System. So they watch over the district banks. I guess the arrow should go the other way. Okay? The Board of Governors watch over the district banks, and the district banks watch over the member banks. Okay? 7 members of the Board of Governors. in order to become a member of the Board of Governors, you have to get appointed by the president. Okay? President Trump or President-elect Biden, okay? They get to name members of the Board of Governors. Okay? They serve a 14-year term, which is a very long term. Only the Supreme Court people, only the justices of the Supreme Court serve longer. These guys serve for 14 years. Okay? And they do it mathematically so that one is rotating out every 2 years. Okay, so they all are on the board, but every 2 years somebody is rotated out and somebody else new is appointed. Somebody rotates out, somebody new is coming in. Somebody rotates out, somebody new is coming in. Okay, now you can get reappointed. The president can reappoint you. Okay, but 7 members serving 14-year terms. They rotate out every 2 years. Someone leaves. Okay? And as you'll learn in your civics class, all presidential appointments have to be approved by the Senate. Okay? One of the members of the Board of Governors is chosen as the chairman. The individual who's selected to be the chairman, and the president gets to choose who the chairman is. Okay? The person who is the chairman of the Board of Governors is one of the most powerful men in the economic world. The book says the second most powerful person in the United States after the president. Okay? The chairman of the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors has tremendous power and influence on the economy. Okay? The current chairman is Jerome Powell. He was appointed by President Trump to serve as chairman of the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors. He is very, very influential. Okay. All right. So the central bank, the bank that the banks use, is called in the United States the Federal Reserve System, or the Fed. Okay. The Fed is made up of a system of banks, from the member banks down at the bottom, like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Chase, supervised by the 12 district banks, and the district banks are supervised or watched over by the Board of Governors. Okay? What exactly does the Board of Governors do? What does the Fed do? Well, that's going to be in the next video.